All right, the history of graffiti. There are many ways to look at the start of graffiti. All right, the Chauvet Cave in France is a very famous cave that has um, cave paintings in it from a long, long, long time ago. So the first type of art was actually technically graffiti. These images often tell a story about their lives from a long time ago. Here's a modern artwork by an artist named Banksy that we will learn about more, and we'll talk about what we think this means a little bit later. All right, World War II, Kilroy was here. So this is the 1930s to the 1940s. Somebody named Kilroy wrote, this was his tag. This is what he put all over the place. It was like a little man peeking over like a ledge. Kilroy was here. All right, the mid to the late 1960s. Graffiti that we know starts. So this is more of what you think when we talk about graffiti. So it was primarily used by political activists and gang members before the mid 1960s. So modern graffiti originated in Philadelphia, so in West Philadelphia, born and raised. You probably know what that's from. So in the late 1960s, Philadelphia, we saw two of the first writers start gaining attention by bombing their names all throughout the city. Now, a writer is someone who writes graffiti, and they're not actually using a bomb like a weapon. A bomb is to cover a large area with your tag. Cornbread, he was the father of modern graffiti. Here he is. We're not going to watch that, but here he is right here with his tag. Now, do you think that he was born with the name Cornbread? Do you think that it's on his birth certificate? Here he is, Cornbread, world's first writer. So these guys were really important because they brought fame to graffiti artists. They were the first ones to be famous. People knew who they were. All right, the Sharpie was introduced, first permanent marker. So 1967 to 1970, we are in New York City. Now, when you think about graffiti, where do you think you see it? Subways. So I know that there's a popular game called Subway Surfers that I know has something to do with graffiti. But we start to see it, in the subways. Taki 183, he's another really famous graffiti artist. Now, I'm not going to read this whole thing, but basically, Taki 183, his name was Demetrius, and the Greek form of Demetrius is Dimitaki. So he took the last four letters, Taki, of the word Dimitaki, and then the number of his address, 183. So no, it wasn't because he liked Takis. I don't even think Takis were invented back then. It was because that was part of a different form of his name, and then 183. So maybe that will give you some ideas for what you want to do. All right, so people started copying him. All right, here we go. This is why we're doing this in art. Before, people were just writing their name or their tag or whatever it was. They weren't adding any style or art to it. So this is where we come in this class. So tagging style. So Lee 163rd, he was the first to create kind of like a logo. So I want you to look at this. Who can describe how he made this more of a design rather than just writing his name? 1975. The end of pioneering one-liners and tags begins to start being more complex. So now we start to see form and shape to these tags. So they're not just like lines, they're actually shapes. They would do them on graffiti, on the cars. We're not going to watch that, but here we are. Tracy and Wild Style were two famous graffiti artists. Wild Style, I like this one a lot. Sometimes graffiti has so much design to it and detail that you can't even barely read it. All right, the late 70s, early 80s. There's a decline in the massive bombing and tagging in the late 70s and 80s because the streets were more dangerous. Now, I want you to think about why would the streets in a city being dangerous make a decline in tagging and bombing? Think about it, and I want you to hear your answers. There was more police out to stop the graffiti. So if there's more police in the streets trying to fight the crime, people aren't going to go out and just do graffiti right in front of a police officer. You'd have to be really stupid to do that. So those artists, those graffiti artists, after the clean train movement, they started taking their craft and their skill on the walls and making it into like paintings and galleries and studios. So we'll look at some of those. So Jean-Michel Basquiat, he was a graffiti artist turned painter. Here's a painting of him. And here's one of his paintings. It's one of my favorites. And you could tell it has that kind of street, gritty style to it. Lots of lines. I like to think maybe this is what was inside his head. And there was one more. Let me go backwards. Here we are. Here he is in front of another one of his paintings. Another famous graffiti artist around this time that became a studio artist was Keith Haring. Here he is in the subway. This is while it was still illegal. He's technically doing vandalism. Here he is getting arrested. Then he started getting famous. People started to pay him to paint these murals, like this one, for example. It's a good anti-drug message. And this fun one. And here he is actually in a studio. This is more like an installation where he painted the walls, the floor, everything in the studio with his style. And people still, I know you've probably seen this before on clothing around because he's still very popular today. All right, until now, graffiti as an art has been ever changing and still is today.